The history of nursery rhymes and fairy tales, they can be quite interesting. Take a familiar fairy tale, and you might find that the original story surrounding that fairy tale or that nursery rhyme confronts our sensibilities of politeness, the sensibilities of decorum, sensibilities of what is appropriate for a bedtime ditty. Grimm's fairy tales, for example, if you've never read them, they are not pleasant bedtime stories. Nursery rhymes often had some deep lesson, sometimes some horrific lesson. So, Ring Around the Rosie is about the Great Plague. Ba Ba Black Sheep was written as a commentary on the English wool taxation system. Over time, however, the story of rhyme, it becomes pacified. It becomes this little ditty that we sing to children that no longer confronts us. And the same is true of parables. It's easy to forget that parables, by nature, were confrontational. Jesus used parables as a way to teach a lesson of the heart by offending the mind. He would bring out some twist of logic or some twist of expectation that would make his hearers wonder what on earth Jesus was actually talking about. And because a lot of his parables were aimed at the religious leaders, the Pharisees, the scribes, and yet by doing so, Jesus discloses one of the fundamental truths about his own nature. He is the seeking Lord. He's the one who pursues the ones he loves. No matter where they are, no matter what they've done, Jesus longs for them. If you wish to follow along, I invite you to turn to your Bibles and turn to Luke chapter 15. The page number is printed in our bulletin. We hear at the beginning of our reading that Jesus was gathering with the tax collectors and the sinners around him. And wherever Jesus went, there was always a crowd, and there was a crowd of these types of people, tax collectors and sinners. And these were the people who were on the outs of polite religious society. So the tax collectors were Jewish people who worked for Rome. At best, they were seen as thieves because they often collected more than they needed. At worst, they were traitors. They were traitors to their national heritage. They were traitors to Israel. Sinners were people who were religiously unclean, and that could be anybody. People who had no claim of God's presence, no claim on God's purpose, no claim on God's love. God had nothing to do with these people, the Pharisees believed. And Jesus kept their company. Right? So if Jesus eats with tax collectors and sinners, well, that must mean that he is also a sinner. And so they criticize him. Those who were in charge of religious purity and religious etiquette and all that stuff, they charged him with, well, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them, so that must mean that he has nothing to do with what God is doing in this world. He's also outside the bounds of God's presence. And so to correct this assumption, Jesus describes who he is by way of parables. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep. Now, let's just stop there. Shepherds were not polite, respectable people. Let's just be honest about that. Right? They weren't what we picture in children's Bibles that, are nice and clean and well-shaven and all smiles and carrying a fluffy little lamb on their shoulders. That's not who shepherds were. Shepherds were kind of vagabonds. They were rough and tumble kind of people. Shepherds smelled because they lived with sheep. They had ripped clothing. They were dirty. They were not people that the Pharisees wanted to associate with. And Pharisees, they thought they were better than the shepherds. Right? We have more education than the shepherds. We have more refinement than the shepherds. We have more money than the shepherds. We're better than them. So automatically, by Jesus saying, suppose one of you has 100 sheep, Jesus is automatically offending them. automatically offending them. This would have automatically put them on edge. It continues, suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Does he not take the other 99, leave the other 99 in the open country, and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? Now, let's just think about this for a moment. And why don't we put this into a modern day situation? Suppose you're walking to the bank and you have 100 $100 bills. Okay? You got a windfall, you just came back from Vegas, you have 100 $100 bills. And now suppose one of those $100 bills, as you're making your way to the bank, just kind of falls out of your wallet and you don't know where it is. Now, here's the situation. Will you leave your wallet full of $100 bill, 99 $100 bills, $99,000, just kind of leave it on a park bench in the open air and go find that other $100 bill that may have fallen out who knows where? Or would you just kind of say, wow, like I wish I didn't lose that $100, but you know what? I still have 99 here. I'm going to keep on going. What do you think that you would do? See, that's the same situation here. Nobody, the point of the parable is that nobody would do what Jesus is saying. Nobody would leave 99 sheep in the open country and go find the one who was lost. Sheep were a commodity. No respectable shepherd would leave 99 sheep alone, vulnerable and prone to wander, and go looking after the lost sheep. Now, the shepherd may have been sad that he lost the sheep. He may have grieved for that lost sheep. Oh, I really like that lost sheep. I really like that sheep. It was really nice. But he would not sacrifice 99 well-behaved sheep for that one sheep that was bad. Do you like that? You know, I tried. I don't know. Right? The story makes no earthly sense. The story makes no earthly sense. And the Pharisees hearing that, when Jesus asked that question, they would say, no, we wouldn't. No, we totally would not do that. The second parable makes no sense either. Jesus says, suppose you're a woman who has 10 coins. Now, let's be honest. You know, if the Pharisees were offended by being associated with shepherds, in this day and age, how much do you think that they liked being associated with a woman in this parable? No, they probably would be seething at this point. But he continues, suppose you're a woman who has 10 coins and loses one. Would she not sweep the entire house and search for the one that was lost? At this point, you might say, yeah, of course you would. Absolutely. The silver coin is about a common day wage. It's about $120 today. So yeah, you would sweep the house. You may not know where it is, but you know in the vicinity of where it is. So, you know, you can probably try to figure it out. So yes, you would sweep the house. But Jesus continues. And when she finds it, she calls over all her friends and family and says, rejoice with me, for I have found my lost coin. Let's have a party. Let's celebrate. I'm throwing a bash. Why don't you come? Now, I ask you, does it make sense to spend probably 3 coins in order to throw a party because you found one? You know, hey, everybody, I'm going to spend $300 to celebrate that I just got a $100 GST check. Yay! Right? It makes no sense. Nobody would do that. Each of these parables confront us with the fact that Jesus does not do what we think would be logical. When the world thinks it's logical to write someone off, to assume that God is against someone based on whatever they've done, to assume that, well, when you're lost, and you have 99 just better people over here. Jesus says that he is the one who searches for the lost. He is the one who longs for them. Our Lord is the seeking Lord. He is the God of the endless pursuit. And there is no place that the sheep could have fallen or wandered to that the great shepherd of the sheep will not journey towards them. I love this parable because the parable of the lost sheep is about the incarnation. The incarnation is God living this parable out. Jesus comes to us. That's who Jesus is. If you look at verse 2, the Pharisees, they say, "This man welcomes sinners and he eats with them." And they mean it as a criticism. But Jesus takes this as foundational to his lordship. He is the one who spreads out his arms in welcome, welcomes all the wayward and the wandering. He is the one who leaves the throne of grace to come to earth in the muck of a stable. And he journeys the streets and the hills and the valleys of human life just so people can experience his grace and his love. He is the one who welcomes us to feast with him in eternity. That is who Jesus is. He is the one who welcomes sinners and eats with them. That word, which in our Bible is translated as a welcome, is the Greek word protokomai. And it means to seek after. It means to look forward to. It means to receive with anticipation, to wait for. Jesus seeks after his sheep. He longs after them. You know, even the best sheep wander sometimes. And they wander because their noses are on the ground and they move from grass to grass, from appetite to appetite. And when they look up, they don't see the shepherd because they've been journeying in the opposite direction, sometimes unbeknownst to them. You know, when we focus on our appetite, when we focus on filling ourselves with whatever is in our fancy and forget to keep looking at the shepherd, we may find that we've wandered as well. But while the earthly shepherd might not know where the lost sheep is, and so might not be willing to search for the one that is lost for who knows how long, Jesus always has us in his vision. He receives us when we look to him. And that is such the driving force of his own heart that there is rejoicing. The end of each parable is the same. There's a party. There is a party for the one who searches is overjoyed when the one that is lost is found. God's heart erupts in joy when he embraces one who has been away from him. The audacity of this parable is that Jesus will always seek us out. Our heavenly Lord is the shepherd who searches, the woman who seeks. In the next parable, God is the father who lavishly loves the child who turns their face back home. Nothing can cause Jesus to refrain from enfolding us in his arms. And this parable challenges the Pharisees with one essential question: will you come to me? Will you be part of what I am doing? Jesus is challenging them to recognize God's mission on earth, and that mission was not to condemn or to keep out, but to welcome. They are challenged to receive the Lord who invites them, who receives them, even though they might be the blackest of the black sheep, or the chief of sinners, as Paul said of himself. Jesus is saying, dare to believe. Dare to believe that you do not need to earn God's love. Dare to believe that wherever you are now, God is. Because part of the twist of this parable is that the Pharisees are actually the ones who are lost. And yet Jesus is still in their midst. He's still welcoming them. He's still talking to them. He's still inviting them. Where are you in this parable? You know, maybe in the parable you identify with the friends, the friends of the Lord who are encouraged and invited to join in the celebration, to recognize that it is the identity of the Lord to search out for the lost. And so you, as a friend, are given the privilege to join in that work and to celebrate what Jesus is doing. How might you join Jesus in reaching out to those who need him? maybe in your family, maybe in your sphere of influence. But maybe you feel like you are one who is lost. And and there's a gamut here, there's a range here, right? Maybe you feel like you're not fully lost. Maybe you feel just somewhat turned around. You might think, well, you know what, it's not that bad. It's like the coin, I'm still in the house, and that can't be all bad. However, when you ask yourself a question, is there a closeness with the Lord that you're missing? There's something that you're looking for from Jesus. Could you allow Jesus to receive you? Notice in the parables that the lost don't actually have to do anything. You don't have to do anything. The shepherd does all the work. He journeys to the sheep. He finds the sheep. He carries the sheep, and he rejoices over the sheep. Maybe all that you need to do is look up and dare to believe that you are in the presence of Jesus now. Dare to believe that Jesus welcomes you and rejoices over you. If that somehow describes the place that you're in this morning, then I would encourage you in the silence of your hearts to pray with me.